is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
Couple of big road tests coming out this week for undefeated teams in college football. Georgia is going to Tennessee. Spread is 10.5 there. Then Washington goes to Oregon State, where they are now underdogs in that game, trying to remain undefeated. We're going to break down both those games and talk about some other spots across Week 12 in college football by talking to Dr. Ed Feng, getting his read on those games and more for this week. Then I'll talk some Formula One in Las Vegas at the end of the show. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and FanDuel Research. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a managing editor of digital media for FanDuel Research, joined here as I am every Wednesday by Dr. Ed Feng. Find his work at thepowerrank.com. Check him out on Twitter at thepowerrank as well. Ed, Week 12 is coming up. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to another week of college football and NFL. Things are always good when the season's going on.
Between those two, you got the Las Vegas Grand Prix for Formula One. It's at 1:00 a.m. Sunday your time. Are you going to stay up to watch it or no?
Yeah, I'm going to be in bed. I think it's interesting that my 12-year-old son has a friend who's going out to Vegas for it.
Oh, so really?
Going to be up pretty late watching it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 10 o'clock local time
right
out there. And tickets when they were first released were like $5,000 a pop. You can get them for like under $1,000 per ticket now. And I'm like, if I had known this over the summer, I would have gone. Like, if I had known it wouldn't be as ridiculous as it looked like it was going to be, like, I happily would have gone.
Right. Yeah, I think it'll be a good event. I certainly saw the traffic out there, the construction out there in August when I was in Vegas. Getting ready for the event. So hopefully it'll be a good event for everyone.
Yeah, I follow a lot of people who live in Vegas just because of like the sphere we live in, and like they are not pleased. So I hope it goes better for them than expected, because it sounds like it has been a mess for them. But pretty fun to break down that race. We'll talk about some spots where I show value later on. Today for college football, though, we're going to talk about the impact of the Jim Harbaugh situation in Michigan, if it actually matters from a betting perspective, given the weird dynamics there. We'll talk about some key games for this week and much more. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to the Covering the Spread podcast feed wherever you get your podcast. Coming up later on today, Tom Vecchio have a breakdown of the props for the Thursday night football game for the Bengals and the Ravens, a massive Thursday nighter for this week. That is coming up on the FanDuel TV Plus app and on the Covering the Spread podcast feed. So make sure you subscribe there wherever you get your podcast. Tomorrow, NFL Week 11 preview with Ed as well. Player props coming up on Friday with JJ Zacharyson. Let's start things off by talking about that Harbaugh situation, Ed. And you've done research in the past about the impact of teams that don't have their head coach for their bowl game. And that's one thing. This is a very different situation, though, given that Harbaugh is around the team during the week, just can't coach on game day. So let's assume that the suspension does hold for Harbaugh for these final 2 weeks. Does that impact your handicap at all? Or is it kind of a wash given that he is there to game plan during the week?
I don't really think it matters at all. That research that you talked about was actually not done by me. It was done by, I don't even remember who did it, but he asked me for my numbers to help him do the study, and essentially found that there was no effect to an interim head coach in a bowl game. And I think in general that is right. I think this Michigan team is pretty motivated. And I think they're going to be fine for the rest of the season. Obviously, there's still a chance that he does coach the last 2 games of the season. They go to court on Friday. I don't know. I mean, the market is kind of where I expected it to be. It's still like 2021, and I think the market is saying, yeah, we don't really care. This team seems pretty motivated. Maryland's not particularly good. Michigan should be able to get this done and then go on to a pretty big game next week.
I was hoping that they get the injunction on Saturday, so he'd like helicopter in right before kickoff. You know, the chopper flies over the stadium. Harbaugh drops in 5 minutes before kickoff. That would have been fun from like a drama perspective. And honestly, at like Saturday morning, following Twitter and the developments of the court proceedings was like a thrill. I know we talked about this last week. We're like, we were not bored of this scandal yet, but like it keeps on providing. So like, it's made Twitter usable again, which I'm fully in favor of.
Usable. That's an interesting way to put it. It did make it pretty exciting Saturday morning. I actually really thought he was going to coach. Kind of surprised that he didn't. We'll see what happens this week. We didn't have the drama of Harbaugh parachuting into the stadium, but we did have the drama of Sharon Moore after the game with his impassioned speech. So you win some, you lose some. That was the trade-off we got.
People were like railing against him, like, oh, like it looks like you're in a cult. And I'm like, it's his boss. Like, I care about my boss. Like, a lot of people care about their bosses. Like, I'd be fired up in that situation too. Like, it's fun, it's emotion. He was fired up. Like, what's wrong with that? I thought it was great.
Right. I can tell you who had those opinions about that. They were Michigan fans.
That's very absolutely. But as you mentioned, spread for that game this weekend, Michigan minus 19.5 taking on Maryland. That game is in Maryland on Saturday. Let's talk about some tighter spreads this weekend, though, and we get things by talking about a big ACC game between Louisville and Miami, where right now Louisville is a 1.5 point favorite. Total in this game is 46.5, and Louisville hasn't been the most impressive team so far this year, Ed, but they have a spot. They're trying to lock down a spot in the ACC championship game. They can't, I don't think, officially lock that up this week, but they can take one step closer to it. Tight spread here. How do you have this game playing out by your numbers?
It's Louisville's first year under Jeff Brom. They've obviously had a great season at 9-1. To me, they are the Philadelphia Eagles of college football because they managed to lose to a terrible Pittsburgh team, just like the Eagles somehow managed to lose to a terrible Jets team in an unthinkable Jalen Hurts game. But yeah, they're having a great season. The similarities with the Eagles kind of continue. They're 4-0 in 1 games, and a lot of those aren't exactly against they are 4-0 in 1 score games. Maybe I should finish my sentences when I talk. A lot of those games weren't exactly against the most difficult competition. Indiana, Virginia. You also have the Eagles with a couple 1-score games against Washington. A lot of similarities. Louisville looks good on both sides of the ball. 12th on offense in my adjusted success rate, 21st on defense. My numbers still see this as a pretty tight game. I'm making it Louisville by 2. Miami, clearly a disappointment. A lot of expectations for the offense, and Taylor Van Dyke, 64th in my adjusted success rate. Has to be considered a disappointment. They did hang tough with Florida State last week. Maybe things would be different had they never lost that unthinkable game to Georgia Tech, where they didn't take a knee in the appropriate time during the game. I think it's close. I don't think there's any value in this game, and good luck to Louisville.
Yeah, you said you have it at 2. Market again is at 1.5, minus 102 on the 1.5. So pretty much in line with market on that one with the Louisville and Miami game. Let's talk now about Georgia taking on Tennessee. Georgia is a 10.5 point favorite with this game being in Tennessee. Total for this game is 58.5, Ed. And you've talked a couple of times about how your numbers have shown value in Georgia, but you want to know part of it because it seemed like they were really hitting their stride. And that has looked like a pretty wise approach, especially given what they did this past week. So what do your numbers say about this week? And do you agree with the numbers this time around?
Yeah, no, I don't agree with the numbers. I mean, I have this by Georgia by 9. I don't feel like betting against Georgia. I know that would have worked 2 weeks ago against Missouri, but I'm not looking to get in the way of this Georgia team. I think the numbers are interesting. I kind of wonder if Kirby Smart follows success rate on defense. When I look at rushing success rate adjusted for who they played, they're 53rd. I mean, that's like grounds to eject the entire team from the squad. Seems like a colossal failure for the type of talent that Georgia has. I do think there are some. This is certainly not as dominant a defense as they had the past few years. That's potentially a problem. Maybe against Alabama in the SEC championship game. Maybe further along in the college football playoff. So with Tennessee, I thought it was interesting. Their defensive numbers were pretty spectacular for the first 6-7 games of the season. They've really dropped. They've dropped all the way to 25th in my adjusted success rate. A lot about 50% success rate to Missouri, and then the game before that, 47% to Kentucky. In the game that Devin Leary actually wasn't a statue back there. So Tennessee has kind of dropped off. I would say a pretty disappointing season for Tennessee. I don't think they're necessarily headed it in the right direction either. I do think Georgia is headed in the right direction overall. I mean, I wouldn't bet my numbers on this. I'd probably lean towards Georgia if anything.
Yeah, 10.5 is -110 for Georgia in this game. And I think the impressive thing is that the uptick began before Brock Bowers came back. And Bowers was back this past weekend and obviously is a pretty impactful player. And I think that that's what makes it more impressive to me, Ed, is the fact they did that before Bowers came back. It was actually when he left, like the first game he was gone, is when they started to really pick up steam, it seemed like. So what does that say to you about their ceiling as a team, given that they've really improved recently and just added one of the best players in the entire nation back on offense in that time?
They certainly have a high ceiling. That's certainly part of the reason why I don't bet against them against the spread. I do think it's pretty high. Is it as high as, are they as good as what we thought they were kind of coming into the season? Maybe, maybe not. And I think a lot of that is on the defensive side of the ball. But yeah, I do think their ceiling is pretty high.
All righty, let's talk here about that final matchup here with an undefeated team on the road. That is Washington going to Oregon State, where right now Oregon State is a 2.5-point favorite. Total in this game is 63.5. And betting against Washington, it did work out for you last week. Utah covered the 9.5 in that game. This time they enter as underdogs. Oregon State opened as a 1-point favorite, as you mentioned, or a 1-point dog, as you mentioned, but they're now 2.5-point favorites. So it seems like a lot of action on the Oregon State side here to swing this game in their favor. Can Washington now pull an upset and remain undefeated in this game?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, that's kind of the way their season is gone. Able to beat Oregon on, field goal late in that game. My numbers have Oregon State by about 2.5 points. So pretty much on market. Really wish I would have grabbed this when Oregon State was +1 on Sunday. We talked last week about how Washington is kind of trending in the wrong direction. That Utah game did not put them back in the right direction. They were significantly worse in success rate than Utah, and that's a Utah offense that is probably trending in the right direction, but is certainly not near their ceiling that they would have had with Cam Rising at quarterback. So, and Oregon State has been pretty good this season. They're 8-2. They got 3-point losses to Arizona, Washington State. Yeah, I think, Oregon State should win, as the markets say, as my numbers say. Washington and Florida State are kind of my frauds out there that are still undefeated. We'll see if they can keep up what they've done so far, but yeah, I guess you would bet against them, and they might take their first loss this week.
We've already seen a lot of movement towards Oregon State, where it's now Oregon State -2.5, and that 2.5 is -115. Is there a breaking point where you would consider buying back on Washington? Because I wouldn't be shocked if we get a 3 out here, given the way the market has moved and where things stand right now. Would you consider a 3.5, or given that you're a 2.5, would that still not be enough to justify betting the Washington side?
Yeah, I mean, it's so close to my number. I can't really. I don't think I'd have too much interest in Washington +3.
Okay. So pretty efficient markets across the sides for this weekend's games, Eds. And where are you finding value across Week 12 at FanDuel Sportsbook?
Yeah, let's talk about some player props. I've actually been intending to talk about a player prop on this show for a couple weeks now. Hasn't quite happened yet, but there's one that I like, and it's in the Michigan at Maryland game. FanDuel has J.J. McCarthy at 230.5 passing yards. I think that's too high. The idea is that, is Michigan going to show anything at Maryland a week before Ohio State? I think the answer is definitively no. And Michigan's played 7 Big Ten games before this. He has only gone over this yardage total in 2 of those games. The one that's particularly interesting is the game against Purdue. He actually ended up throwing 37 times and having over 300 yards. It was actually one of his worst games. I thought he made a lot of bad throws in that game, but it was a weird game in which they decided they were going to chuck the ball, even though they were out pretty big in the second half. I don't know if that was a result to all the sign stealing stuff coming out, and they really wanted to put up a big number against Purdue. Maybe Jim Harbaugh hates Ryan Walters. There's a lot of things that could have been going on. Michigan comes out last week and has the exact opposite strategy in the second half. They threw a singular pass, and then JJ McCarthy threw a singular pass in the second half, which didn't even make it into the box score because there was defensive pass interference on the play. Didn't come anywhere near this yardage total. Against Maryland, I think they kind of split the difference between these two extremes. I think he throws about 20 passes. I like under here. And, it's a pretty big spread too. So it's not out of the question that he sits a couple drives in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, right now that number is 230.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. Under is -114. We talked a lot about betting props on the NFL side of things, a lot of interception props there. Have you been able to I guess refine your process in the college football side of things? Because for me, as someone who doesn't bet those and doesn't bet a lot of college football to begin with, it's overwhelming the amount of options you have. Are you kind of narrowing things down, looking at specifically games that you know the teams well? How are you handling things for betting props on the college side of things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. When I sat down this morning to do this, I actually looked straight at rushing props. Mm-hmm. I do that because, I'm basically looking to fade anyone in the market that's at 100 or higher. That doesn't always work. There was a game where Ollie Gordon of Oklahoma State had a prop of 114 against Oklahoma a couple weeks ago. Oklahoma's rush defense looked amazing by my numbers, but he went over because he got the ball 30 times, right? So you kind of have to handicap carries, who's splitting carries, who's not splitting carries. You have to look into that kind of stuff. I did a brief look at that and didn't really see anything that I particularly liked. And so then the next strategy is go to teams that you understand and have some sense of what they want to do, what their situation is. And I clearly understand what's going on with Michigan. And so that was kind of the next thing. And I ended up looking at JJ's passing prop. It just seemed off. And it's interesting because DraftKings has it at 227. It's usually the opposite. Usually FanDuel has it under whatever DraftKings total is. So it's kind of interesting to figure out exactly what you guys are doing with the analytics back there, how you're projecting this out. I know you guys have some model. I know you guys have a lot of people doing this. I can certainly see why maybe that you would have it. I don't know. It's interesting. You got to project attempts here, right? And I think that's really hard to do after Michigan's last two games. I do think it's reasonable to take some average. And look, I feel pretty comfortable. Either Maryland keeps us close and Michigan has to throw a lot in the second half, or there's some outlier, he's just chucking it in the second half, even though they're up late, or he breaks there's a couple big plays that happen that push this over. I think those are all pretty unlikely. So that's generally the thinking behind this.
You mentioned Ollie Gordon against Oklahoma, 33 carries, 138 yards in that game. Next week, he's facing UCF, whose defense has struggled so far this year, projected shootout. So I used Ollie Gordon in DFS and 12 carries, 25 yards, Ed. So hopefully you faded Gordon the second consecutive week because it would have worked out beautifully last week.
They ended up getting blown out in that game, right?
Yeah, it was real bad.
Yeah, so that's probably part of that
John Reese Plumlee, Kobe Hudson going nuts, and Ollie Gordon doing nothing on the opposing side.
33 carries, though. It's
right.
A guy's going to go whatever. I think that's only 4 yards per carry or something insane like that, right?
So he had 138 in that game. I think that's half of what he had the game before. I think he had 270 the game before that. So
on 20 carries though, right?
Right.
That was all explosive plays.
Right.
So I think the handicap in terms of he wasn't going to do much against Oklahoma, a good run defense was fine. But any running back that gets 33 carries, they're going to get some yards. Unless
I think that last week 12 for 25 confirms your handicap was right, even if you didn't get the good result the week you actually did bet the under there. So process.
Well, but I think that's a lot of the game script, right? I know UCF was
they were favored in that game though, and you could have honestly seen a situation where they would have trailed Oklahoma too. So
no, for sure. But I'm just saying, they were a 2.5 point favorite. The fact that they were up, Oklahoma State was down so much in the second half was not something that would have been expected. So
right, exactly.
Win some, lose some.
I'm going to put that one in the process column for you. I'm going to score you a win for that one. That is Ed Feng. Make sure you find him on Twitter at The Power Rank. Check out his work at thepowerrank.com. Ed, what's cooking for you this week at The Power Rank and on the Football Analytics Show?
On the Football Analytics Show, I actually posted a pod about home and rest advantage in football, a little bit of the process behind how I go about calculating things. I actually did this a while back. It was part of some of my premium stuff, but it was interesting to go back and note that we aren't actually sure that like buy advantage exists in the NFL, like statistically. Yeah. Like we're pretty statistically sure home advantage exists, but we're not really 100% sure about the buy advantage, even though we've talked about that and I use it in my model. It's just a sparsity of data. And so I talk about like my whole process about how I do that, give the latest values that I use. So check that out at the Football Analytics Show. And then also still writing my newsletter at thepowerrank.com, 5 Nugget Saturday. If you're looking for action on any given weekend, that's the free service for you. So check that out at thepowerrank.com.
And especially if you're someone who's like got like old school football knowledge, I think that rechecking where you're at on home field is important because it's changed over the years. So kind of getting a refresher on that is good. So check that out at the Football Analytics Show. Ed, appreciate you as always. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jim.
Alrighty, find Ed on Twitter at The Power Rank. Check out his work at thepowerrank.com and find that podcast, The Football Analytics Show, wherever you get your podcasts. We're going to finish things up by talking about some F1 in Las Vegas here in just 1 second. But first, score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, totals, and more. So visit FanDuel and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager. Only $5 pregame moneyline wager required. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. In Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona. 1-888-789-7777. Or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. 1-800-9-WIN-IT in Indiana. 1-800-522-4700. Visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas. 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia. 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Let's talk now about some Formula One. This weekend, they're in Las Vegas, the first time for the Las Vegas Grand Prix. I guess I should say the first time in about 40 years. So they have been there previously, but first iteration of this race. And it's going to be pretty fun watching them race on the strip. That race, again, is on Sunday night, or Sunday morning, I should say, Saturday night, 1 a.m. Eastern, so midnight Central. I'm trying to get all my time straight here to get us ready for this race. But first time they've been there, and there's a lot of unknowns as a result, not just because it's the first time they've been to the track, but also because it's going to be very cold, like one of the coldest F1 races in history, which leads to a lot of differences in tire degradation and stuff like that. So there's a lot of uncertainty here, and there are some values I do like. The first one is actually Max Verstappen to win the race. He's minus 250 at FanDuel Sportsbook. The implied odds there 71%, whereas I have Max at 78%. I'm not super confident in this one because there is a lot of uncertainty, and it's possible I'm under accounting for that. So it's a value there. It's a route that you have if you want to bet this race. I would be okay with it. I did take Max at the same number elsewhere personally, so I don't mind it, but not the biggest value. And I understand that's not quite fun enough to bet a minus 250. So let's talk about some other potentially more fun bets that are also values per my numbers at FanDuel. The biggest ones are on Lance Stroll and Daniel Ricciardo. Stroll the value for him is in to finish top 6. Top 6 odds for Lance Stroll at FanDuel Sportsbook are 16-1. I've got that as a pretty good value based on my numbers. 16-1 at FanDuel. He's as short as 7-1 in some other places. And I've got him a lot closer to the 7-1 than the 16-1. 13% odds for me for Lance Stroll to finish inside the top 6. Implied odds are 5.9%. If you look across all races so far this year, Stroll's actually been inside the top 6 in 20% of the races. So again, his implied odds are 5.9%. Now, most of that was earlier on this year when Aston Martin was running a lot better, but they rolled out a second big upgrade package at Circuit of the Americas 3 races ago. In that race, it was a sprint race weekend, so Aston Martin just one practice session to fine-tune the car, and it went terribly. And then they had the sprint race, and they decided to scrap everything and start the race from all the way in the back. Once they did that, though, their pace is actually pretty good. Stroll finished that race 9th, got bumped up to 7th after a couple of disqualifications. So pretty fast in that one. And then in Mexico City 2 weeks ago, Stroll qualified 3rd and finished 5th. So got another top 6 there. It aligns with when this team had upgrades. They showed pace at Circuit of the Americas as well. So I think we've seen good speed out of this team once again since that upgrade at Circuit of the Americas. I buy into what the model is saying here. I think that plus 1,600 is a very good number for Stroll to finish inside the top 6. Kind of a quasi-home race because he's Canadian, so close enough at least. Out in Las Vegas, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think 16-1 for Stroll, good number for him to finish top 6. I'm very on board with what the model is saying there. As for Daniel Ricciardo, value for him is to finish top 10. Ricciardo right now at FanDuel Sportsbook is plus 220 to get a top 10. I've got him at 42%. His implied odds at plus 210 are 31%. Now, that may sound odd because Ricciardo has this one top 10 running this year, joined the grid in, I believe, race 11 or 12. Missed some races with a broken wrist, but it's been about 1 out of 6 races for a top 10 for Ricciardo. But the pace has been good. He's had some weird incidents that have masked that pace. A couple spots where he had damage or got a lap down and really wasn't his fault. So I'm okay overlooking those and looking more at the speed. And the speed has definitely been there, especially recently. Ricciardo finished 7th in Mexico City, qualified 4th there. Last week or 2 weeks ago in Brazil, his teammate Yuki Tsunoda finished 9th there. Pretty good speed in the sprint race as well. So I, again, sided with the model here and thinking that Ricciardo's a bit undersold by the market at plus 220. So Ricciardo, top 10, plus 220, and Lance Stroll, plus 1,600 for a top 10, or top 6, I should say, the primary 2 values. Other one is in Pierre Gasly. I did bet this one. He's plus 160 for a top 10 at FanDuel Sportsbook. I have him 46%, and his implied odds are 39%. Now, I bet this one personally, but it might be better to wait to bet this one because Gasly, both last year with AlphaTauri and this year with Alpine, has been kind of weird in qualifying where he's had just kind of a lot of misses. He's had a lot of bad qualifying sessions. So if you look at the second half of this year, since the summer break, Gasly has finished inside the top 10, 5 out of 8 races, a very good rate relative to the market here. But he's actually started outside the top 10 in 6 of those 8 races. So if you had waited to bet Gasly until post-qualifying, you'd probably have gotten a better number of most of those. And again, it happened last year too. So you may be able to get a better number on Gasly post-qualifying should something happen once again. The reason I bet it is because I will not be in a betting legal state this weekend, whereas I am right now. I live in Illinois. We'll be in Minnesota this weekend. So I did bet it personally. I can't wait to get a better number later because I won't be able to get that one. Basically, what I'm saying is I buy into what the model is saying. I think that Gasly is a value to finish top 10 at plus 160, but you might be able to get a better number if you wait until after qualifying. So kind of handle it the way you want to. I think it is worth noting there's a decent shot that you can get a better number later on. Personally, though, me knowing that I can't get that better number, I am okay taking it where it currently stands. So Gasly plus 160 for a top 10, a fine bet, but I don't feel as strong about that one as I do about Stroll plus 16-1 for a top 6 or Ricciardo plus 220 for a top 10 and then potentially Verstappen minus 250 to get the win in this race. That is all we have here for today on Covering the Spread. As mentioned, later on today, Tom Vecchio will swing by and break down a very fun Thursday night football game between the Bengals and the Ravens. To get that, find it on the Covering the Spread podcast feed or over on FanDuel TV. Plus, this show also over on the FanDuel YouTube page. Subscribe there. Hit the like button if you like what you hear. If you like what you're on the podcast side of things, give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Big thank you once again to Ed Feng for joining us earlier on. You can find him on Twitter at The Power Rank. Check out his work, thepowerrank.com. I am on Twitter at Jim Sonnes. You can also find me on Threads at Jim.Sonnes. You can follow FanDuel Research on Twitter at FanDuel Research. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your bets across Wednesday. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow to break down NFL Week number 11. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.